In the next stage of my project, I decided to focus on how different forms of portraiture and different mediums affect how we create and view portraiture. I created 3D casts of Emma and Joe's faces to investigate whether a sculptural portrait is a more thorough or comprehensive form of showing visual information about a person's appearance than a two-dimensional form of portraiture. This idea was informed by my research into death and life masks, a prevalent practice and form of portraiture up until the early 1900s, where a cast would be taken of someone's face, often after their death, to create a mask or bust of them, which was extremely lifelike and accurate. I found that I had to alter my method of creating the masks for Emma's, as I found that I had issues with Joe's mask being not particularly detailed. This was because I used clay slip to stop the plaster of Paris from sticking to the mud rock, and this method lost some finer details of the cast. For this reason, I decided to solve this problem by using Vaseline for this purpose instead of clay slip, which meant that the work... My next stage of research and development was using first-hand research experiments to see how portraits are altered and changed under different circumstances, and I tried to either create portraits or see if I could get people to create portraits that used methods that they normally would not use, to see how this affects outcomes and how they differ from the norm. I'm exploring this idea because my interest strongly veers towards portraits that are untraditional and that create and show portraiture from interesting perspectives. My experiments included getting Emma to draw over my face onto paper to see how this affected portraiture when you're drawing onto a 3D canvas, and also getting Emma and Catherine to draw each other while not looking at the pages, just looking at each other's faces, to see how portraiture has changed when the two artists are purely looking at their subject rather than the work they're creating. I also got people to draw different portraits using different methods, things like with their eyes closed, using continuous line and not taking their pen off the page, and things like this, to see how this affects portraiture and outcomes. I then decided to record audio of people talking about their lives and telling stories, as I'm very interested in storytelling as an aspect of portraiture. I recorded audio of Emma talking about her childhood and her favourite pastimes when she was younger. She talked a lot about how she used to be really interested in ponds and pond life, especially frogs. I used this audio to create a short looping animation of Emma as a young child holding a frog. This was partially inspired by the company StoryCorps, who record people's oral histories of their lives and create animations for them a lot of the time. I find that this method of illustrating a story by animating it brings a story to life very effectively. This process required a lot of planning, and I had to do a lot of problem solving around, firstly, the fact that I had a very base level knowledge about how Adobe Animate works, and also how I first drew the image of Emma in Photoshop and then imported it into Animate, which caused me a lot of problems further down the line, meaning that I now know not to do this for the future.
I just really liked frogs a lot. Like I would spend just like hours like crouching in front of my pond and like looking inside, and like I would always pick them up and like hold them, and like I probably had really gross hands all the time, but and like you know, and you get like clusters of tadpoles, I'd always just like shove my hand in there and be like, yes, and they'd all like nibble me, and it was really good.
Looking back on the creation of the life masks, this process was an important learning curve for me, as I had to problem solve around the issue of the lack of detail in the masks and how to solve this issue. The creation of the masks also helped me to understand and appreciate how sculpture as a medium differs drastically from two-dimensional portraiture, and just how accurate these face casts can be. Also the different appeals that 3D portraits have compared to other forms of portraiture. This also helped me to decide that although I learned a lot from this experience, I won't be using sculpture as a final piece or outcome, as this is not the direction that I want my project to pursue. The different portraiture exercises served to cement my interest in unusual portraits, and particularly unusual methods of creating portraits. In these examples, it led to some very free and abstract portraits that differed greatly from what I would traditionally picture a portrait looking like. This is definitely the direction that I want my project to take, and I want to pursue unusual and untraditional portraiture for my final outcome. Animating this story from Emma helped me to realise that I definitely want a large component of my final outcome to be about storytelling, and I want my portraits that I create to tell stories and information about the subject of the portrait. Also, creating this animation made me think that I would perhaps like to use this method of animation as a thing to pursue and to include in my final outcome, though I may have to consider time restraints as animation takes a very long time.